So this is a little bit experimental here because I have started a new position at my work lately. I have not had very much time to spend doing videos, and the space that I normally do them in my home has been being used for other things in the moments when I possibly could have. So I figured that the one pocket of time I do have that was relatively uncaptured was that I do a fair bit of driving during my work, and so I decided that I would attempt to use some of this time to record some of my thoughts and put some of the things that I've been wanting to talk about on video. And I've still been listening to so many fascinating conversations and things, and even it's hard to find the time to sit down and write a decent comment for most of them. So for all the channels that I normally watch, if any of you guys are watching this, I'm probably still keeping up with your videos. Trying to watch, been watching Grail Country a lot, and Meaning Code, and Grim Grizz, and the bunch of the Randos conversations, the one with Chad and Lance, that was really good. And Jacob's channel, I've been keeping up with most of what he's put out. So, to any of those people who may watch this or not, I do appreciate your stuff. But I wanted to talk about one thing that I've been trying to work on a little bit, is kind of an essay I've been writing, and I've been writing about how we use a lot of big philosophical terms in this corner of the internet because we're talking about big, meaningful things, and that's appropriate, and the language is helpful. But I think sometimes, it's easy to kind of live wholly in this sort of philosophical world where you're thinking about these things, and that there are these arguments why X and Y are correct or why they are incorrect, and it's kind of easy to lose sight of the meaning making that is happening on the ground, maybe for the less sophisticated people. And not to say that I think that people that are outside of our corner of the internet are unsophisticated. I think that they, by and large, there's a lot of very intelligent people. But if you've not grown up in church, or you haven't invested heavily in something like a Jordan Peterson's material or John Vervaeke, or the academic studies, psychology, philosophy, etc., it's very you don't have the same tools as far as vocabulary to think about a lot of these things and explain a lot of these things. And I always want to try to communicate in such a way that a sixth grader could understand what I'm saying and make sense of it. Partially that's because I spent quite a while as a youth leader and a youth pastor and as a middle school teacher, and so I always kind of think about when I get really deep into these arguments, the one point I may be looking up words and I'm saying, oh, I know what that means. Yeah, I understand what they're saying there. If it's not a word I'm familiar with. But in my actual thinking, I am always thinking of these sort of things on the level of narrative stories. And for me, and I think that this is common for a lot of people, well, I think the Bible is the map that I relate everything to, and the story and the narrative in there. But everything that I'm relating to that is the stuff that's going on in pop culture, TV, books, movies, stuff on the internet. And I like a lot of fiction. I like a lot of science fiction and fantasy and things like that. I like books. There is a big community of people that are heavily invested in a lot of book series and things like that. So I could talk about that. But I think that movies are probably even more so the way that people conceive of things. And so, and especially like science fiction. And I would say like when we have like the Marvel movies, that falls into the category of a science fiction, especially in the sense of, they're dealing with a lot of mythological aspects, especially as we've gotten into the more magical character stories, Thor and Doctor Strange and these things. And the interesting thing is that, there's actually like a lot of really serious like metaphysical concepts that goes into these movies. And so this essay that I've been kind of working on is relating some of those things, like, and I was thinking about that Doctor Strange movie with, about the multiverse and all this stuff, and like some of the concepts in there, and I think that, this is a really like, this is a concept that's difficult even for scientists to explain, and part of it is developed out of, anything but God as being the explanation for why things are the way they are. And so, that's a knock that I've heard against, like, the multiverse or things like that. But then, I was also thinking about other things, like time travel, and we have this concept of time travel, which has always been heavily bound to the concept of, like free will versus determinism, because if you go back in time and you change something in the past, does that change the future or does that create an alternate future? Because how could, if you're part of the future, how could you go back in time and change the past without it changing you prior to the events happening? And, that's done very seriously in some movies, and, that's like H.G. Wells and The Time Machine, and anything based on that. He was very deterministic in the sense that you could not change things in the past because it would cause the thing that brought you to the past to not happen. In other words, in that one, the guy's trying to save the woman that he loves, and every time he goes back in time, he stops the specific thing that causes her to die, but some other random thing happens, because if she never died, he would never create the time machine, and therefore it's not a changeable event because it's necessary. Whereas, Back to the Future has like an alternate universe being created when events in the past change, and therefore the things that are changed have to go be corrected to bring everything back to the way it is. And then, and then a little bit unknown in that universe, and it's not, maybe the most serious, but it's good movies. But, is this concept of, you are in a future now that seems like the future that you left, but is it really? Or is that other future simultaneously existing somewhere and you're just not in it because you left it and moved into a parallel universe? And so that's, kind of get a crossing of the concept of multiverses and time and things like that. And then, you have like a Bill and Ted that's totally ridiculous, where they just don't worry about any of the logical reasons why something wouldn't work because it's funny. And, I was thinking about the fact that these sort of like metaphysical questions about space and time, and this is definitely not an ideal camera situation, but hopefully that's entertaining. I don't know. These things are relevant to our understanding of God. And I think this is the sort of thing where in polite corners of Christianity, we want to have a source that is legitimate. And so, we go to like the mystical authors, the early church fathers who were more symbolic thinkers and things like that. And, we can then use their very serious conceptions about, how the incarnation of Christ was necessary before, for the creation of the world, or how an event that's seemingly in the middle of time, like the life of Jesus, can in some ways affect both the future and the past simultaneously. And, this is like very serious stuff. And because we don't want to appear foolish or whatever, anything that we're not sure of, we always want to couch in terms of mystery. Or if you're in the more, let's say, the modernistic, like evangelical circles, you just have to couch everything by saying, like, this is speculation, or perhaps this is how a miracle worked, or something like that. Because it's like, if you think about like a miracle like Jesus healing somebody, we can conceive of a mechanic in which God causes a thing to happen that sometimes happens on its own. Like things heal themselves, but we just see Jesus does it in a miraculous way, and therefore someone is healed much more quickly. So we can understand that. We can understand that, how that could work. God does a thing, and it does this. But like something like, the miracle of the bread and the fishes. Like, where are these extra fishes coming from? Like, there was a certain number of fishes, and it's coming from somewhere, and where is it coming from? And, I think that, like in an academic setting, in a theological academic setting, you can't talk about that because that is outside of the realm of things that are in, the purview of your study. But, there are scientists who can speculate about all sorts of crazy stuff, but they're not particularly interested in talking about the loaves and fishes, mostly because they aren't Christians. And I think even there's a problem where Christian scientists who are of very solid fields, physicists and chemists and biologists and things like this, they all want very much being cognizant of the fact that they are Christians in a field where Christianity is not the norm. They strive to be the most professional and therefore the most cautious and the least speculative, and so who gets to have fun with these ideas? And I think that in one aspect, it's the fiction writers who get to have fun with these concepts because they don't have to figure out exactly how everything works. They can kind of make an explanation that gives a reasonable sense of what's going on, and within the context of their little universe, makes sense, and therefore it's believable enough so that the reader or viewer can suspend disbelief and enjoy the movie without the premise being ruined. Now, for instance, I have heard like Hugh Ross is a astrophysicist and he's a Christian, and he's talked about like he just can't watch some of these science fiction movies or whatever because he has to suspend disbelief too much. And I think that's the problem of like science fiction doesn't tend to age well because either one, you project the year 2000 that we're all going to be having jetpacks and flying cars like the Jetsons or whatever that is, and we're nowhere near that. Nobody has personal robot butlers. Nobody has all this stuff. So that didn't age well because the science didn't keep up with the timeline. Or you go back further, and you read like C.S. Lewis' Space Trilogy, which was written before, Sputnik, and, his concept of what outer space was like and what space travel would be like and how it would work is doesn't stand up. Now, to me, it's at that point it's so, obviously anachronistic that it doesn't really matter. You can still enjoy it, but that is one of the problems with like science fiction. And I think Frank Herbert was brilliant in that he set his world so far into the future and so distant from our reality that while technically it claims to have a continuity with our Earth and humanity as such, it doesn't matter that the science doesn't work, because he's almost saying like, well, 10,000 years ago or 10,000 years in the future, they're just going to have science that does this and science that does that. He doesn't need to explain it. It's almost like, at a certain point, technology becomes ubiquitous. Nobody in general could explain how does an iPhone work. No one could make an iPhone by themselves. It would, there's too much going on, but we all know how to pick up a smartphone and how to use it and do things with it. So, that's the, so he kind of gets rid of that problem by just putting his fiction super far into the future. And then it's almost really like a fantasy story. Science has just replaced magic. And then, on the speculative end of things, then you kind of get this sort of thing with like Marvel where, you have these gods and you have magic and you have all these things, but then, when you look at it, we see all these wires and lights and things underlying it where we, are made to understand, well, maybe the magic, and this is almost the idea of like the magic that was in the past was actually technology, and technology, came from the future or something, or came from a distant planet or something like that. And this is kind of the ancient aliens sort of hypothesis. But, I guess what I'm saying here is that I think as Christians, we maybe ought to be using some of these things, not that we have to understand them perfectly, but as functional, short-term, useful analogies for explaining or thinking about or understanding things about how God works and how things like miracles may work in the Bible. And, I think that, so that's kind of what I'm trying to embrace, is that idea. And really what it kind of got me thinking about is this idea of imagination. And that imagination is a way that we all use our imagination in how we conceive of God and how we understand Him. But we don't think of that as like a trustworthy or a useful thing. I think it's something we probably all have certain ways that we imagine God and how He is. And this was kind of an interesting part of Chad and Lance's conversation about the God of your own understanding. In a sense, we all have a God of our own understanding, or to put it another way, we all have our own understanding of God, and our imagination plays a very active role in how we build that understanding, yet we don't often embrace the idea outright of, let's imagine what God could be like, or how God could have worked, or how God could have done this thing. And, one of the reasons is that we bump up against tradition, and, I don't think tradition is bad, but I think that there is a problem with the idea of tradition in that it can cause us to behave in a way that is not beneficial to us because we aren't using our imagination and we're not wrestling with these ideas deeply. And, I guess what I'm trying to say is that perhaps we have to surrender, what happens in mainstream science to the mainstream scientific authorities. But, in other words, we are not going to have any control over how NASA and the U.S. government spends their money and what MIT researches. We don't, it would be cool if they would decide to spend their money researching stuff that would be really cool, that they won't, because we're not in charge of that and we didn't have the right degrees. And, and that's even where academia has the same problem of tradition that religion has, because you can't say something too far outside of the range of accepted beliefs, because if it's too far outside, then you become a laughingstock, or or people don't take you seriously. And so you really have to be like the topmost person in your field to be allowed to even have new and novel ideas. Or you have to be able to construct an infrastructure that bypasses that whole system. Like Elon Musk, he can do whatever he wants because he just pays for it himself. But, even I'm sure that this is a frustrating thing in the field of academics, and I think that the sort of people Jordan Peterson talks about, and even like, when you listen to like him talk to like Richard Dawkins and stuff, he's like basically trying to find as much legitimate reasons to get Dawkins to consider his ideas that he really wants to talk about and the things that he's really excited about, but he knows that he has to couch his terms in language that will not make him sound ridiculous, and this, it's always the bowing of course we know that due to evolution and millions of years of change over time and this and that factor, blah, 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 but here's what's really exciting, and then we get to the thing that we actually care about. And the same thing happens in religious circles. We can say, of course we know that this confession says X and Y and this and that and blah, 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 but maybe what it really means is that God's doing this or God's doing that. And I think, when we look, like in the book of Acts, Peter first discovering what happened with Cornelius and Paul with some of the other believers and stuff, and seeing like, this gospel is for Gentiles too. They kind of had to reset their whole way of thinking about it because they encountered a truth that was new and unaccounted for And it changed not only the way things would happen in the future, but it changed the way that they looked at everything in the past. And so, that's the kind of thing that I think we really need to discover more of. But we really need the people that are not afraid of looking foolish or sounding dumb to work through the problems to get there. And so that's kind of why I am, exploring this concept. And, now, realizing I am beholden to no one, either academically or theologically. I am a member of a church, but I would have to probably say something. I don't even know if there's anything that I could say that would be too ridiculous and crazy to get me excommunicated or something, So, I have this YouTube channel and I want to use it for that. And I think that, why I'm thinking about it in terms of science fiction is that is where a lot of this imagination is taking place in the culture and in the minds of many young people. And in many ways, science fiction does drive science, because if someone pursues a career in academics and they get to the top of their field and they are in charge of what the experiments are going to be, then they can make the choices to say, I'm going to try to make X and Y thing that came from a science fiction movie and see if I can make it happen. And, so that's kind of, that's an exciting thing. And really, so what I'm saying is that pool of imaginative thought is what Christianity needs to be drawing from, so that we can see something new and have a meaning and a significance in the future. So those are my thoughts for now, and hopefully it wasn't too awful to watch this shaky video, and hopefully the audio is okay, but potentially I may have to do this as the way that I have time to still make content in the future. So thank you for listening, and please leave comments if you like or agree or disagree with anything I said.